So it looks like the vast majority of you are teachers. It's interesting, although I only taught in regular schools for about 7 years or so, I still think of myself as a teacher. Of course, I do teach graduate school right now, but so I guess I still am a teacher. But this program is really aimed primarily at teachers. But to the extent that principals work with and encourage teachers, of course, it's appropriate for principals, district trainers as well. I hope district curriculum administrators also find it helpful. Okay, and our third question is geographic region, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like the majority this time is from the Northeast, so it looks like you've dug out. And I'm sorry for those of you in the Northeast and Midwest especially that have really had terrible weather to deal with this year. I'm almost guilty to say that we have a bright sunny day here in Portland, Oregon, which is very unusual for this time of year. Usually it's pretty gloomy and rainy. Okay. Alla, do we have other things to do, or should we get going?
Nope, that was all of them. Thank you so much for participating. I know that we've already been talking with Cary, but I do want to introduce him. Cary Sneider is a lead writer for the NGSS, as well as a research professor at Portland State University, and he has been our presenter for this webinar series. Cary, we are all yours.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is my cat, Gibson, who you will see walking by every now and then. And we are happy to bring you what we call Don't Play the Blame Game. Now, just a little warning is this sounds a little preachy. And it's my effort not to be preachy, but to simply share with you the experiences that I've had in my multi-decades of teaching. And in particular, how it deals with the next generation science standards. So we're going to begin with some ideas about the NGSS. That specifically deals with this issue about what we call as the blame game. And you'll see as we progress what I mean by the blame game and why it's important not to play it. So let's go. Let's see the first slide, Ella. And there's a little delay, by the way, for slides when I ask for a slide. I'm guessing that signals are going around 50,000 miles before we actually see the next slide, so don't be surprised. So first of all, consider how the NGSS differs from prior standards. Just about all standards in the past have been written by teams of university professors, scientists, a few engineers, and so forth. But the NGSS is quite different. More than half of the writing team are current teachers. During that time, a couple of them have moved to other positions. But even the rest of us who were, like I was at the time considered a college professor, so, but those of us who are not teachers at present have been teachers. And our goal has been to create a document that teachers can teach and students can learn. And which means it's limited in scope. So one of the objections to prior sets of standards is that there were hundreds of things that kids were expected to learn. And the idea is we left out a lot of that. In fact, the NGSS has been criticized because certain ideas that have been all along in science textbooks and so forth aren't there. So the purpose, though, is to limit in its scope, and that doesn't limit what you are expected to teach. What it limits is what students will be tested on in high-stakes tests. So it also provides clear statements of what students should be able to do. Now, one of my one of my roles before actually was facilitating revision of standards in the state of Washington, and we made a number of trips. And I remember one of those meetings with a group of teachers and having one stand up and say, please tell us exactly what our students should be able to do. We can accomplish that. We can provide the kind of experiences that they need to succeed. But be specific. Don't say students should understand that, because we don't know how that's going to be tested. So, so this set of standards we aren't going to be looking at, we'll look at a few of them actually today, are called performance expectations. It's exactly what a student should be able to do to show that they understand the standard. And finally, these performance expectations are connected both within and across grade levels. So, for example, a 5th grade teacher. There's been attention to what should be taught in 5th grade in the different subject areas so that there's some reasonable connections. And those connections are through something called cross-cutting concepts. And then grade by grade, this is called the learning progression in the NGSS. And so there's certain core ideas that are introduced every few years, not every year, because if you try to teach everything every year, the curriculum again goes out of bounds. It's just too much. But they're sequenced so that each set of ideas builds on what students learned about that topic a few years ago. And a little later, we'll be looking at an example. So let's look at the next slide. The other point is that teachers are absolutely essential. Now, of course, most of you are teachers. So I'm preaching to the choir, but I'm just going to explain a little bit about what I mean by that, because it's going to lead into the theme for today. It's essential for all teachers to have a solid grasp of this learning trajectory of each core idea. Now, the NGSS, so I've covered this in prior webinars, but in brief, the NGSS only has 12 big ideas, and they develop from kindergarten through grade 12. And it's important for a teacher to know not only what they're supposed to teach in that year, but what kids were supposed to learn about it before and what they're expected to learn afterwards, so that the teacher understands exactly what their role is in that whole learning trajectory. Now, again, if you're a 3rd grade teacher, you don't necessarily have to understand the details of what a 12th grade student will have to understand about a core idea. But you need to understand, at least in general terms, where it's going. Let's look at the next slide, please. And I'll explain why that is especially important. So if a teacher is aware of what their students are expected to know and be able to do when they come into the classroom, and how this year's teaching is supposed to prepare them for the next step, the teacher can do a better job of ensuring their students stay on course, because they need to know what the course is, what the whole course is. So to do that, it's important when beginning any new unit to begin with some kind of diagnostic assessment. And diagnostic assessment isn't necessarily a test that kids sit down and take, answer questions on paper and pencil. So this example here in this picture shows a group of students, probably biology students, using microscopes, with a teacher looking carefully at what they're doing. One of the ways that I first discovered how important this is in knowing where kids are, where they're starting, was my first year of teaching. And I was teaching a unit, I was teaching math at the time, and I was trying to teach the concept of the tangent. And rather than having the kids just read a tangent table, I thought I would have them all make triangles, measure them, and create their own tangent table. Tangent is just the opposite side of a triangle divided by the adjacent side. So it's easy to just make all these different triangles, all with the same angle, but with different sizes, and then measure that ratio. And what happened, I handed out protractors and explained how to get started. And as I walked around, I realized they didn't know how to use a protractor. These are high school students. And so, of course, I changed my goals. I said, oh, the first thing I've got to do is teach how to use a protractor. So this is a case in which kids were expected to learn how to use a protractor in earlier grades, at least in middle school, if not in upper elementary school. And so my job, I realized, is, before I go on to my lesson, is to teach them how to use a protractor so that I can then move on to the lesson that I was supposed to teach, which is about the tangent. So that's kind of an example of knowing what the trajectory is. It's important to know what they were supposed to do before, as well as what they're supposed to do with the tangent in this case. So for that purpose, I need to know the depth of understanding that they need to have. So let's go on to the next slide. And so here's the lesson. Here's the point. If it turns out your students don't have the knowledge and skills that they're expected to have, it's really essential not to play the blame game and say, oh, the prior teacher didn't explain that. And the reason comes from lots and lots of research. Hundreds of research, probably thousands of research studies show that whenever you're trying to teach something, you do a pretest and post-test and find out on the post-test, usually, wow, the students did better, so they learned clearly. In many cases, a delayed post-test is done at a later time. Sometimes it's 2 weeks later, a month later, sometimes at the end of the school year. And almost invariably, you find that on average, students do more poorly on the delayed post-test. Not surprising, we forget. And not only forgetting, but also reverting back to our early methods, reverting back to our early ways of doing things and ways of thinking about things. Because new ideas are, well, they're new. And sometimes they really require a stretch. And over time, sometimes that it's just much easier to think back in the ways we used to think. So with the next generation science standards, students aren't taught the same thing the next year or even 2 years later. Usually it's about 3 years later. The reason for that is that kids go through major developmental levels every 2 to 3 or 4 years. And so to really teach a subject at a much higher level, to make it worth it to teach the subject again, there's a spread. So naturally, I mean, if they know less on a delayed post-test 2 weeks later, they're going to know a lot less 3 or 4 years later. So expect it. Expect that that's what happens. And then expect that you're probably going to need to reteach some of the core ideas from before. So again, nobody's to blame. It's simply a matter that recognize that that happens with the brightest people and the best teachers. So let's go on to the next slide. So, this is the main point that I've been making, that it's the way people are. It's the way people learn. Things take time. And the learning process is not a continuous uphill march. Twists and turns and even occasional dips occur. So one of the interesting things to keep in mind, too, is sometimes as students learn more, often they get the wrong answer even more frequently. So a colleague of mine, Philip Sadler, who works at the Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Massachusetts, found that in certain areas, as kids learn more, a certain misconception, a common misconception, all of a sudden seems reasonable because they hadn't thought about it before. So in the beginning, maybe by chance, they would get an answer right. Later, as they learn more, they get the answer wrong because something else seems more reasonable. So for example, the idea of seasons. Why is it warmer in summer than in winter? The idea that Earth is closer to the sun at that time sometimes develops when kids look at pictures where the sun is in the middle of the page, and it shows the Earth's orbit going around the sun, often in the shape of a ellipse or an elongated circle. Now, if you were to look at it from above, you would see that the Earth's orbit around the sun is circular. But to show perspective, often, it's shown in the book as being kind of a long, oblong shape or ellipse. And kids look at that, and they can say, oh, it looks like the Earth is closer to the sun sometimes and further away at other times. That must be why it's warmer in summer. So that's a case where, as they learn more about the Earth and sun and space, they're drawn to the misconception that seasons occur because Earth is closer to the sun. In fact, in northern hemisphere winter, Earth is further from the sun. The reason has to do with the number of hours of daylight, in part, and the relative position of the sun in the sky in the summer because of the orientation of the Earth's axis as it goes around the sun. That's a much more complex thing to read. So the point is that learning is not continuous. It really changes, and each year it's necessary to look back. But the earlier experiences are still very valuable because students will learn more quickly when they encounter that idea again, even if during the interim their ideas have somewhat been, well, let's say changed, or if they've even developed misconceptions. Now is the time to return to those set of ideas to help them get back on track. So So the main point is, if your students are doing poorly on a diagnostic test, it's your job to reteach the unit, the earlier unit, so that kids who are struggling can catch up. And it's important to pay attention to how that was supposed to be learned, as well as what they were supposed to know or be able to do. But on the other hand, you don't want to bore students who are ready to move on. So again, I've never had a class where everybody is at the same level. There's always some kids who are slower to catch on, those who are quicker. And so this is where the art of teaching comes in. And it's called differentiated instruction. And it means being able to spend more time with some of the students, but to give others challenging additional challenges so that they can be more deeply involved. And of course, it's not only the art of teaching, but also the art of curriculum development. So often, if you have a curriculum material that has ideas for how to do that, by all means, look at that and be prepared for that, because that will almost always be the case. So again, that's our job. It's a tough job. It takes a lot of creativity. It takes a lot of thought and really willingness to pay attention to our students and how they're thinking about things. But it's important to do that and make sure everyone's on the same page before moving on. So you can have different levels of challenge, even for the same subject area. So let's go on to the next slide. True story. So as I said, I want to be less preachy, and I noticed at this point on my PowerPoint I tend to get a little preachy. So I'm just going to tell you a story about what I've learned even more recently. So yes, early in my career, I had opportunities to really see how important it is to pay attention to my students and to do differentiated instruction and so forth. But this idea of the blame game hadn't really come to my attention until quite recently. I was doing a professional development summer program and for elementary teachers. And I had one person who had been a physicist. And he had worked in industry for many years. He was very confident in his skills. And he decided he was going to retire from the corporate world and be a teacher. And to start with, he really wanted to find out what elementary teachers were doing and how they were thinking so he could understand where kids were coming from. He was a wonderful fellow, really well-motivated, well-intentioned. He liked the teachers he was working with. They would do activities, and he would just take on every project with spirit and enthusiasm, even though these were really elementary activities, and he was quite familiar with the science involved. So at one point, one of the other teachers came to me at the end of class and said, you know, this person made a comment that, oh, if only the middle school teachers would communicate this idea, then I could just move right on. And he said, now, these are elementary teachers, and they very quietly didn't say anything, but it's clear they really took offense at this, feeling that, again, we're being blamed for not doing a good job. Now, as you know, this is an issue in our culture in general. Now that we have high-stakes tests, and there's a lot of feeling that kids in our country are not up to par, they aren't doing as well as other countries, there's a lot of blaming going on for teachers at all levels. So this is a very, very sensitive issue. And so what we did the next day my co-teacher and I had conferred about this, and she said, you know, there's this poem that I have. I want to, and rather than, we really didn't want to embarrass this person at all, but we wanted to communicate how important it is for every teacher to really see helping not to play this blame game. So here's the poem. Let's go to the next slide. And we're going to, as I finish each slide, as I finish reading each slide, be ready to press the button for the next one. So the poem flows nicely. Okay. It's called Don't Give In to the Blame Game. The college professor said, such rawness in a student is a shame. Lack of preparation in the high school is to blame. Said the high school teacher, good heavens, that boy's a fool. The fault, of course, is with the grammar school. The grammar school teacher said, from such stupidity may I be spared. They sent him up to me so unprepared. The primary teacher huffed, kindergarten blockheads all. They call that preparation? Why, it's worse than none at all. The kindergarten teacher said, such a lack of training never did I see. What kind of woman must that mother be? The mother said, poor, helpless child. He's not to blame. His father's people were all the same. Said the father at the end of the line, I doubt the rascals, even mine. So, needless to say, everybody really laughed at this. And we had a little discussion. We didn't steer the conversation, but we did remind the people, all of the teachers there, how important it is to realize that that even if the last teacher did a fabulous job, a really good, constructivist, engaging lesson, that kids really got it, 100%, which of course was never the case, but even if 100% of the kids got it, they aren't going to be fully prepared the next year. So I propose that we give up on this idea of blaming teachers, of blaming kids, of saying that, of this statement that kids are unprepared for college and the job is really up to K-12, and simply say, these are our kids, what do we need to do to help them? So you can call it remediation. I call it instruction. And so I think we really need to stop playing the blame game at all levels of instruction and figure out what to do. So the next part of this presentation is what to do. So let's go on to the next picture. And by the way, if you have questions, comments, thoughts, we are going to have some time at the end of this. I'm going to try to leave 15 minutes for us to have some conversation. I really would love to hear your thoughts about it. So how do you go about doing this? So here's why this is relevant to the next generation science standards, because the next generation science standards really gives you some very, very helpful information to do what I've just been advocating. So let's suppose you're a 5th grade teacher and you have a unit on the sun, moon, and stars coming up, an astronomy unit. So you go to the NGSS and you say, well, when was the last time kids were expected to study those ideas? Now, the way it's coded in the NGSS is Earth and Space Science, ESS 1. And you will find references to ESS 1 once or twice, I think the 2nd and 3rd grade. But the prior time that kids were actually supposed to have an astronomy unit about the sun and the moon and the stars was in 1st grade. So you go back. 5th grade teacher needs to look at the 1st grade standards. And here's what it says. Let's go on to the next slide. And you read through it. And it says that if your students can understand the standard, they should be able to meet these performance expectations. So number 1 is use observations of the sun, moon, and stars to describe patterns that can be predicted. Now, an important part of the statement is use observations. It's not just memorize these patterns. And secondly, to make observations, again, make observations at different times of year to relate the amount of daylight to the time of year. So both are pretty straightforward. And notice that in both cases, for first graders, they aren't expected to understand the Earth's position with respect to the other planets and the sun. This is not about the solar system. It's about what they see in the sky from their own observations. So as a 5th grade teacher, you want to find out if kids have actually done this and what they learned from it. So let's go on to the next slide. And it's also important to pay attention to what are called the clarification statements. So in the NGSS, for every performance expectation in black, you'll find this, usually in a colored or lighter font, what are called the clarification statement and assessment boundary. So let's look at the first one. Use observations of the sun, moon, and stars to describe patterns that can be predicted. What does that mean? Examples of patterns could include that the sun and moon appear to rise in one part of the sky, move across the sky, and set. And stars, other than our sun, are visible at night but not during the day. So by patterns, they're not talking about the constellations. So can they recognize Orion or the Big Dipper? Personally, I'd like them to do that. But the important thing is this pattern of how things move in the sky. The assessment boundary, again, specifically star patterns is limited to stars being seen at night and not during the day. So that's a pretty simple idea. Let's go on to the next one, and you'll see the. All right. So how would you probe their ideas? So let's take the moon for example. Well, how many of you have seen the moon at night? Let's hear. Raise your hands. How many of you have seen the moon in the daytime? Not everybody raise their hands. How many of you say the moon never shows up in the daytime? Well, so you get a sense. Now, the moon, of course, is visible in the daytime or the nighttime, and sometimes neither at all, neither. And so it's important to know what your students know about that. So, okay, so how does the moon move? Does it rise and set like the sun? Does it stay in the same place all night? Or does it appear and disappear? And then you can probe further to say, oh, gee, there's a difference of opinion here. How would we find out? Here's where we lead to observations. So again, this is not in the 5th grade curriculum. You're a 5th grade teacher. If kids don't understand these ideas, can't refer back to any observations they've ever done, you've got to start doing it. Observing things in the real sky takes time. But it's so important for them to see that what they're learning about the Earth, sun, moon, and stars is not just something they read in the book, but it relates to the Earth, sun, and moon, stars around them, the ones they see every day. So it's important to change the curriculum to include that. So these particular questions are about the moon. There are others about the sun and the Earth and so forth. And a little later, I'll give you a reference to Paige Keeley's series of probes, which are a wonderful way to get a kid's ideas and understanding. From the kid's point of view, it's a really interesting activity. From the teacher's point of view, it's a way of finding out what they know and can do early on. So that's one of the statements. Let's look at the other one. Go on to the next slide. Again, you're the 5th grade teacher. And the 1st grade students were also expected to make observations at different times of the year to relate the amount of daylight to the time of year. So the emphasis here is on the relative comparisons of the amount of daylight in the winter to the amount in the spring and fall. It's obvious to us, but may not be to the kids at the 1st grade level. Assessment is limited to relative amounts of daylight, not quantifying the hours or time. Now, my guess is that by the time they get to the 5th grade, most 5th graders will have this experience because even if they aren't asked to go out and observe, they've all been through enough years now to know that in the wintertime, by the time dinner rolls around, it's dark out. Whereas in the summertime, they can play baseball until 7, 8 o'clock at night in many cases, and it's still light. So it's important to go over both of those and make sure they have the appropriate experiences. Let's go on to the next slide. So again, it's important, though, to ask questions. Which of the statements are true? There are more daylight hours in summer than in winter. There are more daylight hours in fall than in spring. There are more daylight hours in winter than in summer. Which of these is true? Let's have some discussion about it. So the important question, though, is if someone challenged your answer to those questions, what could you do to demonstrate you are right? And, of course, now kids have access not only to going outside and looking, but also to the Internet. And so there are records online about the length of day and the length of night. And actually that leads very nicely to what they're going to be needing to do at the 5th grade level to really understand these patterns much better. So let's go on to the next slide and see what 5th graders are expected to do. And so let's see. This is a recollection of what 1st graders are doing. Sorry, I forgot this last slide. Let's go on to the next one. So it's important that they understand these two ideas and sets of patterns and be able to describe them and how to learn about them before they go on to the first one, which is support an argument that differences in the apparent brightness of the sun compared to other stars is due to their relative distances from Earth. That's the first one. Now notice how different this is than the 1st grade one. The 1st grade one is what you see in the sky, and the patterns you see from the Earth. Kids are not asked to imagine themselves out in space. But in this case, kids are expected to imagine themselves in space, to see the sun in the sky, and then to look at the stars and realize that the stars are so much further away, that's why they're so dim. Now, this is a hard idea for kids, that the sun is a star and the stars are suns. It's a hard idea because the sun is so bright. It's so amazingly bright compared with the stars that it's kind of hard to swallow. So they need to have some experiences like looking at streetlights, at the one that's real nearby and how bright it is compared to the ones in the far distance. They need to have some experiences to help them understand this idea. The second one is to represent data in graphical displays to reveal patterns of daily changes in the length and direction of shadows, day and night, the seasonal appearance of some stars in the sky. So this one is also related to the Earth. It's what we can observe right here on the Earth. But in this case, kids are making graphical displays, so that it's quantitative. But also, it leads again to the space idea, because the reason we're seeing these patterns is how the Earth moves with respect to the sun. So it's not that the sun is moving and making these shadow changes, but in this case, the Earth is turning. And this idea, from my own research I've found, is actually a big idea for the 5th grade level, 5th and even 6th grade level. Because until now, kids may have heard we live on a ball in space, but it's a really difficult idea to swallow. But the 5th grade level is the time they can really understand the implications of that and start to take the space view that we live on this ball-shaped Earth. But again, the foundation of these ideas is laid in the 1st grade level and needs to be reestablished in the 5th grade level through observations of the real sky. And then they can start to make these connections for why we see these observations, why we see these patterns, because of the Earth in the solar system as a whole. Let's go on, please, to the next slide. So, in summary, in order for learning progressions to be of value, it's important that teachers use them. And you use them to check students' understanding at the beginning of any unit, to fill in the gaps before moving on, and to realize that when the students leave your class, they have to have really powerful understandings and memories and deep-level understanding so that when they get to the next level, that teacher can help refresh their ideas from your class and then move on to the next level. That's the message for today. So I did leave some time. Let's look at the next slide. And this one, I believe, is about resources. Yes. So uncovering students' ideas in science. It's published by the National Science Teachers Association. And these books include probes. These are pictures that you show students. And in many cases, it's several students' ideas about them, about what they see. So, and it gets kids to have some conversation and discussion about that. And it's a way of really revealing what they're thinking. That's why it says uncovering students' ideas in science. So I co-authored one of these on astronomy with Paige Keeley. There are about 6, I think, in the series now. The first few are all different science to focus on specific areas of science. And so let's see if I remember one of them. If the Earth were completely transparent, and you could look, and you were to try to look at people in far-off countries like China and India, which way would you look? Would you look to the east or to the west? Or would you look upward or downward? And have kids discuss it. And oddly enough, a lot of people think you look to the east because that's the far east. But other kids will say, well, actually, you'd look downward if you can look through the Earth. And when kids realize that there are actually people that live down there on the other side of the world beneath their feet, is when they really begin to get the idea that we live on a ball in space. So that's where you find out if kids really understand the idea or not, with questions of that sort. So they're probes that really probe deeply at the kids' understanding. And they're on all different areas of science. There are many other ways, too, and of course what you want to do is look at your curriculum to see what it suggests to do for diagnostics. And you can also, if you have a curriculum that goes, say, K-8, and you're teaching at one level, you might look at the earlier curriculum to see what students were supposed to have been doing back then to see what they remember. So we have some time for questions. Let's go on, questions and comments. So I'm going to wait a couple of minutes. And Ala, do we have any questions yet?
We had one question early on that I wanted to address. Alan wanted to know if copies of the slides will be available. Alan and everyone, we will be sending a follow-up email that will contain a link to the archived copy of this presentation, so that will be available to you anytime.
So I want to add to that for each of, this is the 7th in the series of webinars, and I produced some papers of 2 or 3 pages each. Those are to be posted on the McGraw-Hill website. I don't know if they have all been posted yet. I just sent the last one in, well, this morning. So they might not all be posted yet. But
that is correct. Most of them are posted. We also send out a copy of that paper with that follow-up link.
Oh, good, good.
Yep.
Because in the paper I can, well, for one thing, you don't have to take notes during the webinar, and it gives you an opportunity to take a little different cut at those ideas, but they're rather parallel. In fact, in putting together a webinar, I usually write the paper first because that's how I think. Make sure I understand the ideas I want to communicate, then I'll develop the slide set. And Ala, who's on the line, is the one who illustrates these slides, and so I really appreciate her. I love the way you illustrated the poem, Ala. That was
well, thank you.
That was nicely done. So, do we have another question?
We do not have any questions at the moment. Please feel free to type those in. We've got about 10 or 15 minutes before we have to close up.
Yeah, and I also appreciate any comments, too. This idea of blame, in particular blaming teachers because of low test scores and so forth, is one I'm very sensitive to. And although this webinar focused on not having teachers blame kids or prior teachers, the issue of blame in education is just so broad right now that I just think it's so important for us to address as a society as a whole. And I try to do all I can to blunt any criticism because it is unwarranted and it makes things worse by far. We have enough to do than to deal with the issues of being blamed, to do what's really a very, very challenging job. So any other comments?
We do. We have a question from Geraldine who would like to know. She says, the College Board recently revised the AP Chemistry program and developed some wonderful guided inquiry activities. Can we expect a similar program?
A similar program in second one?
I'm not sure. Geraldine, if you could clarify that question, that would be great. We'll go on to the next question, then we'll come back to that one if that's okay.
Okay.
Carl says, I think this was a really good and informative webinar, and the idea of doing what your students need is something that gets forgotten sometimes in the world of high-stakes tests.
I missed that. Say that last sentence again.
He says that the idea of doing what your students need is something that gets forgotten sometimes in the world of high-stakes tests.
That's right. You know, one of the problems of high-stakes tests in the past is that they have focused on what are pretty vague standards. So it's very hard to know what it is that your students are expected to do on the test. In many cases, it's not taught because the teacher wasn't aware that that's what the kids are going to be tested on. And that's one of the things that is just infuriating. That's why when you put a group of teachers together to write the next generation of science standards, we wrote these very explicit performance expectations. Each one begins with a verb. Students are supposed to observe something. They're supposed to argue from evidence about such and such. Or they're supposed to plan an experiment to do so-and-so. So they aren't so specific as to be a set of items that kids would be tested on, because after all, you want to use a variety of items to test their understanding and ability to do something. But they're really specific as far as the kinds of things kids should do, so that it's clear to the teacher what kinds of experiences the kids need to have to lead to that. So it's my hope that test scores will go up because the tests are much better aligned with the curriculum and instruction. Once NGSS takes hold in a larger number of states, and more states can use it. Now, even in the states that don't adopt, I've spoken to teachers who are starting to use the NGSS as a way of guiding their instruction. So it may have value even then, even for states that haven't adopted. But by adopting the NGSS, I really think we'll be well ahead of the game and do a better job of really measuring what kids are learning. So do we have a clarification yet on the chemistry AP? And
yes, we do. Geraldine says that she's asking about sample-guided inquiry activities for different grade levels based on the NGSS.
Ah, okay. Okay, that's a very good question. I expect yes. I don't know of a particular project to do that, but I will tell you what Achieve is working on. Achieve is the organization. It's a private organization funded by, with private funding, with support from the states, from 26 states, as a matter of fact, and that developed the NGSS because it is not a federal program. And recently, Achieve obtained some additional funding to do what are called evidence statements. So if you look at a piece of student work, what's the evidence that they have met this performance expectation? Think of it as a rubric, as a way of really assessing whether or not a student really is able to do this. Now, that's a step towards actually coming up with the work samples or the activities where students would show their understanding. They would show their understanding either through discussion or usually through production of some paper or PowerPoint or something that they've produced. So the idea is to work towards those examples so that teachers can use them in class to help their students. Now, the other thing to think about is that's the role of curriculum also. And as curricula are developed over time to meet the demands of the NGSS, these activities will be built right into the curriculum. Now, there's a transition period that we have from the time, I think 8 states have adopted so far, to after 5 years, when we have a lot of curriculum materials that have been developed specifically. And there are some, so I'm thinking that what's valuable is to take 2 approaches. One is to look at your current curriculum and see ways that you can shift it towards the NGSS by really interpreting it carefully. The other is to look at other materials that have been developed that support the NGSS in various ways. So, for example, I'm just, in the next few months, I'll have a book coming out called Engineering Curricula Ready to Go from Corwin Press. And that will have 40 chapters, about 40 different curriculum programs that support the engineering side of the NGSS. So there are materials out there, and looking at other things to gradually make the transition is really valuable. So whether or not there'll be one source, it's probably not likely of these activities to help your students practice exemplary activities, because again, this is not a federal program, and various companies, McGraw-Hill, will certainly be coming out with a number of very well thought out curriculum programs. I'm sure that will have many of these examples in them, and if they do, I hope to be part of it.
We have another question. David would like to know, does the NGSS imply indirectly that there needs to be 4 years of science in high school to meet all the standards?
Oh, excellent question. Well, first of all, I think there should be 4 years. It certainly can't be done in 2. I think what is most likely is that the majority of states will probably require at least 3 years of science. And when we were working on this, what the kind of assignment we gave ourselves was for the high school level to be, we should be able to, kids should be able to accomplish this if this were very, very well planned in 3 years. But that's going to take a lot of work in curriculum development. And it also doesn't allow for much further exploration. One of the differences of the NGSS is Earth and Space Science is much, much stronger in this document than any prior standards. And most schools don't even teach, most high schools don't even teach Earth and Space Science. So there's going to have to be a lot of changes at the high school level. Now, one way to look at it is that Earth and Space Science, because it integrates life science, physics, and chemistry, is a wonderful capstone project where you bring those core ideas together in exploring the Earth and space. Another way to do it is to integrate it into the other subject areas. So, for example, when teaching about ecosystems, you might also teach about human impacts on Earth systems and Earth systems in general. So there are ways of connecting them. Certainly, space science, astronomy can be taught in the context of physics, as it often is. So there are a lot of different ways of doing this, of bringing these ideas together into a course sequence. So I would say the short answer to the question is at least 4 years. Preferably, I'd like to see 4 years, because that allows further expansion. Not only the NGSS, to keep in mind, is a minimum of what all students should at least be able to learn. Hopefully, students will go beyond that. Certainly, students in any AP class will be going well beyond what is in the NGSS. NGSS is not intended to limit, but it's simply to set a minimum of what all students should know and be able to do. So, sorry, that was a little longer answer than I had planned. Any other questions?
Yes. Christina would like to know, how do you anticipate the gap in spiral between its inception to the time when the spiral is working throughout the grade levels?
Would you read that again?
I'm sorry?
Would you read that one more time, please?
Oh, certainly. How do you anticipate the gap in the spiral between its inception to the time when the spiral is working throughout the grade levels? So I think what she's asking is, how do you know where in the grade levels a particular skill is first taught, and when does it spiral again in the upper grade levels? Christina, please correct me if that's not what you're asking.
Well, okay, so I think the answer, the way you interpreted the question is very easy, because you go into the NGSS, and there are 2 ways that it's online. There are 2 versions of it. One is by disciplinary core idea, DCI, and the other is by topic. And if you look at it by disciplinary core idea, it's a lot easier to see where in the grade level. So the letter code. So for example, ESS1, Earth and Space Science 1, is about astronomy. And you look at where that appears in the standards. And then you simply look and you read what it has to say at that level. I think, though, the deeper question is what happens in between. So in astronomy, it's taught in grade 1 and grade 5. What happens in between? There's that gap. What should students be learning about that, perhaps? And when it's working at all grade levels, because they revisit astronomy in the middle school level and on the high school level. So it's revisited 4 times. In order for the spiral to work, they really need to make a full advance each time. So each time you review what's happened before, do whatever other activities are needed to bring students to that level, and then they can move on to the next. And I wanted some advice that I've given teachers is not to teach astronomy in grades 2, 3, and 4, because they should be focusing on what the assignment is for that year. Astronomy is not one of them. Even if you love it, you can do it after school as an activity, have a stargazing night. You can certainly, encourage kids in the areas that they have interest in. But the focus really should be on whatever is being assigned and taught in the NGSS for that year. So, so to revisit when it's expected to be revisited. And there will be those gaps. Kids learn things in jumps. So I'm not sure if I answered her question. But I guess we can think of it in those 2 ways. One is that you can look it up easily enough in the NGSS by using the codes at the beginning of the performance expectations to see when it should be taught. And not to revisit it in any large way in between those times, so you can really focus on what needs to be done. Because the main point of limiting is to spend more time learning things in depth. And if you do that, it means you can't cover everything every year. Anything else on that?
Yeah, we had several questions actually about that, the whole question of time, and Christina did clarify that that's what she was asking about. There have been a couple of other people who have asked the same thing. I do believe that you've just covered that for us. So I'm going to move on to another question. Donna would like to know, do you have any suggestions for how to help a whole faculty at the elementary level better understand and begin to implement the NGSS?
I'm working with a school district, a local school district, on just that. And so they're a middle school, and I so urge them to work 6th, 7th, and 8th grades all together, because again, that helps them look at what they need to accomplish together. And to begin by, here in Oregon, what we've done is a crosswalk between our current standards and the NGSS. To look and start with, since we haven't actually officially adopted yet, but probably will in a few months, look at what we already are doing that is consistent with the NGSS, and to drop some of the things in the curriculum that are not in the NGSS. Sometimes that means giving up a sacred cow, something we love, or doing it a different year, but sometimes actually just giving it up so that we can spend more time with those that we have. And then there needs to be time for that group to get together. So I propose the first thing we do, that group do, is identify a unit of instruction that is similar to what's in the NGSS, and have that group present it to the rest of the group, and to discuss how it is similar and different, how it might need to be tweaked so that it supports the NGSS. So for example, we're focusing on the practices. And in a unit as a whole, you go through several practices, maybe not all 8 that are in the NGSS. But there's something in the beginning about asking questions and planning experiments and analyzing data, arguing from evidence, obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. So you look at the unit and see how well does the unit as it is engage students in all of those practices. How well does it help to prepare them to meet the performance expectations? And how can we tweak it to better do that? But to have the whole middle school team focus on those questions together, where they're looking in common at one set of lessons. And in doing so, to spend especially time about the engineering practices, because each practice has a science and an engineering side. It's not only inquiry, but it's also engineering design. And how can you create a scenario around some of these activities where the students are not just supposed to ask a question, but actually solve a problem that could meet people's needs. So that really is a lot of tweaking involved. To spend a few months on that, and then the team can break up into the 6th, 7th, and 8th and really examine their curriculum after they've had that common experience. So I'll be going out to help them choose a unit, and then I'll be a coach on the side, always better than the sage on the stage, to help them think of how to tweak that with respect to the NGSS. And then we may reach a stage later on where we'll be looking at new curricula when it's time to adopt new curricula to really assess and to evaluate. And there are tools already being developed for evaluating alternative curricula to see which are most compatible with the NGSS. And a process really is important to follow at that stage. So that's my advice. Hope you're able to make it work. Keep in mind that there are many other curriculum writers of the NGSS that are out there. I have immense respect for my colleagues that have worked on this, and you might check the NGSS website to see which ones are in your state, who you might involve in that process.
Well, we are all out of time for this afternoon. There are some questions that have come up that we have not been able to answer, and we will follow up with those of you who have asked those questions via email. Dr. Sneider, thank you so much for these series of webinars. It's been really informative, and I know everyone has enjoyed them. Folks, there is a quick survey at the end of this webinar that we would really appreciate your feedback on, and we hope you join us for the next series. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.